Well, this is going to be a very personalized discussion today. First of all, I have to apologize for not making sure everybody was aware that there was a change as to the time frame and the meeting itself. So I apologize for that. So for those of you that show up at 11 o'clock, you'll be disappointed. No vision boards, no lunch today, right?
More time to create visions to put on.
That's right. Create more visions for the time we actually do have that presentation.
Well, it'd be easy to win the tickets today.
Oh my God, yeah.
Put 3 cars in. Oh, you're not putting one in at all. I'm taking you down for that, girl.
There's hardly anyone here, so yeah. I think for everyone that showed up today, we're gonna give everybody movie tickets. That's what we're gonna do. Everybody's a winner that's here today. Let's do that. There's no losers here.
Yeah.
So before I go over today's presentation, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. So new law bans medical debt from credit reports. So beginning January 1st, no longer will medical debt or lates associated with medical debt be reported on your credit report.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so that also means it's going to affect credit reports and or information that landlords receive in regards to prospective tenants. So keep that in mind. That's no longer going to be on credit reports. Although there's a loophole, apparently you can actually get a medical credit card, and that medical credit card can actually be used to pay medical debt, and it can have an interest rate up to 36%. So if you're delinquent on that credit card, then that will be reported. But for any medical debt that you aren't paying, so anyone that's in the medical industry, you're going to be suffering because there is no recourse against anyone who's not paying their debts. That's what it's going to come down to. And usually that's the biggest threat from collection agencies, medical professionals. It's going to be on your credit report. So another reason to not pay your bills, right?
Encourage them not to pay the medical bill.
That's exactly what it's doing. Yeah, yeah. And then because we're so consumer oriented, beginning January 1st, once again, Assembly Bill 2347 doubles the period from 5 to 10 business days in regards to responding to an unlawful detainer action. So remember, when somebody is delinquent on their rents and a landlord has to give them a 3-day notice, it's a 3-day business notice, by the way, to pay their delinquent rents or quit. Now, if once an unlawful detainer action is served upon them, and you still have to serve them, they now have 10 business days to respond before a default could be entered with the court. So it goes from 5 business days to 10 business days. And that, of course, is going to extend the duration of time that individuals who aren't paying their rent are protected. That's a long time. So you think about it, 3 business days for notice to pay or quit. And then once you're lucky enough to serve them, once you do serve them with an unlawful detainer action, it's 10 more business days before there might be a default judgment entered. The option is to respond, obviously. That's what they should be doing. So keep that in mind. And then I just wanted to mention, Los Angeles is considering following San Francisco's guidelines that they may be providing legal counsel to anyone who can't afford their own attorney. So if you have clients who are interested in rental properties in Los Angeles, you may want to steer clear of Los Angeles. There are many reasons already. But now the city of Los Angeles might be providing free legal counsel for those people that are in default on their rent. And then there's, let's see, there's an event that's going on. I think it's in Long Beach, the convention, the Realtor Convention. So what's coming up at the convention, it's talking about the new rules. And of course, there are many, many people that are confused. And I just wanted to read some excerpts about an article that was in the Orange County Register. And we get a lot of quotes from agents, and agents don't really give consideration to what they're saying. And Gov Hutchinson, who is the Assistant General Counsel for the California Association of Realtors, also should give consideration to what he's saying. So his comment at one of his presentations was, for the rest of your life, you'll be referring to the time before August 17th as the good old days. Why would he ever say anything like that? It's so foolish. It just portrays his negativity. Agents that are being asked questions, and of course, it's being published in the newspaper, are obviously saying, oh, this is so difficult. We shouldn't have to do this. It doesn't matter what we want to do sometimes. We have to comply with the guidelines, don't we? That's really what it comes down to. So it's talking about people that are very confused with what's taking place. I would say anyone that's here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people here. And there's no confusion here in this office, right? At least for the people that are in attendance. So
We have 8 people online.
and we have 8 people
Oh,
online.
right.
Okay, there's at least 8 more people that read the email that came out late. I apologize once again. So now, what it's saying also, and everybody's recognizes most buyers are requesting concessions in their offers. And so meaning 2 different types of concessions, cover closing costs and then separately to pay the buyer's agent's commissions. So that's nothing new, right? We're doing that already. And then some people said, I just thought this was interesting. Agents are saying, this is just too complicated. Well, this doesn't matter. This is a profession, you're licensed, so you have to understand the laws. A lot of people don't know that. But here's something else that took place. So agents are complaining that they have clients with whom they haven't signed representation agreements. And those buyers are going to open houses. And the agent at the open house is stating, I am not going to show you the property unless you sign a representation agreement with me. That's the problem. So they lose their client. That's a real problem, isn't it? So one of the agents at the presentation with Gov Hutchinson was complaining that I had a buyer, went to an open house. I didn't have a representation agreement signed. The agent holding open house said, I'm not showing you the property unless you sign a representation agreement with me. The agent said, that's not fair. And Hutchinson said, that's the way it is. So you can lose clients if you don't have a representation agreement. You send it to an open house, or they go to an open house and they sign with somebody else. So procuring cause guidelines are changing dramatically. We just had that happen, as a matter of fact, ourselves this weekend. So keep that in mind. It's something that's very important. So we just have to accept it. That's what we were told. Have those representation agreements signed. That's very, very important. So we have sent out, I don't know, Carlos, so we've sent out this home buyer guide. Oh, you're doing with John? Okay. I'm going to say the answer is yes. So we can personalize this. So I think when you're, what was that?
I did.
You did, okay. Everybody got it, that's great. So if you're working with buyers, and most of us are, you should actually have some kind of presentation. So that's what we've put together for you. And I'm going to go through that presentation. So the very first page, as you can see it on the screen, shows Coldwell Banker Platinum Properties Home Buyer Guide. Looks pretty nice, huh? If I can go to the next page, I'll really be happy. There it is. So we're going to talk about, not that you have to have this, read this, but I think this is a guideline in regards to your presentation. This is going to be no different than a listing presentation. I think for the most part, most buyers aren't aware of the guidelines that we have to contend with. So you need to give them a reason why they're going to sign a representation agreement. So let's tell them all the things we're going to do. So we're going to say, in regards to the beginning of your search, I'm also going to help you with the purchasing process. I'm going to help you with the pre-approval process. And also, I'm going to help you with your home search, and I'm going to provide full service support. Now, it always sounds like everybody says that, but I don't know if people actually say that. But you should have something you're presenting to them, as a matter of fact. That's my opinion, at least. Then the purchasing process, step by step. Let's just give them some basic idea. You know, you may think that all of this is very simplistic to you, but for most people, they don't buy that many homes. So you need to understand, or help them understand, exactly what the process consists of. I think the whole idea is to generate some level of confidence in regards to what you're doing and why ultimately they're going to sign a representation agreement with you. That's the goal here. So initially, we want to talk to them about getting a mortgage pre-approval. We want to avoid a pre-qualification. It's not as strong. Next, we're going to tell them that we're going to discuss their wants and needs, and we've got a checklist provided hereafter. And I think that's very important because so often buyers complain that agents present them with properties that don't meet their criteria. So why begin to alienate them? So let's figure out exactly what they want. Now that's going to change, and you should tell them that. And we're going to select properties to view, and then we're going to view those properties and we're going to write an offer. So this is part of what you should be telling your clients. And then we're going to negotiate terms. And then once the contract is accepted, this is what they should be aware of. There's going to be different things taking place following contract acceptance. We're going to have inspections. We're going to have, I can't read this. So small. Homeowners insurance, that's a big issue in California, right? Hard to get homeowners insurance. And there's where I'm reading articles that State Farm's going up 30 to 34% in regards to their homeowners insurance. And that's probably just one of the carriers. So that's California's solution to the issue in that we're facing now. Not to do anything to prevent claims, but to just allow these insurers to increase the premiums. And they're claiming that's going to bring more competition. And now it might, at least more people won't be, at least entities may not be pulling out of the state of California. But then we're going to talk about the appraisal process also. And then mortgage financing, which is critical for many, not all people. As a matter of fact, we see a lot of all cash offers. And then we're going to resolve issues following the time of acceptance. And there's always issues in a transaction. There's always something going on. And then title insurance, help them understand exactly what title insurance does and why they're paying for that. I thought I had a better presentation here, Carlos. Let's see if you. There we go. That's better. So we talked about that. And let's let them know what you're going to be doing. I think a lot of people wonder, why am I paying you this amount of money? I'm skipping around here. So I'm going to meet with you. I'm going to show you properties that meet your needs. If you think about it, when someone talks to you about the percentage that or the dollar amount that they may be paying, how can you break that down to make it sound as if it's reasonable? If you're spending, my guess is on any transaction, you're spending 100 to 150 hours. How much are you actually earning per hour when you're working that amount of time? And that does not include any hard costs that you're incurring also. So what's an attorney charge? Well, we know it's an ungodly amount, right? It's a lot of money. It doesn't matter who it is you're speaking to. Anyone that charges on an hourly rate, it's a lot of money. And now we see the laws are becoming much more complicated. That requires more educational process, aspects on that are being forced upon you. You have no choice, as a matter of fact. The good news is there's going to be more and more people falling out of the industry. There's less activity to begin with. At some point, it will pick up. Who knows when? Today, because of the fact that Iran is now threatening to send ballistic missiles to Israel, this is the biggest reduction in rates we're probably seeing in a long time, as a matter of fact, for interest rates. So I think war is good because people run to safety. So if safety causes the yield on U.S. treasuries to go down, and then mortgage rates follow U.S. treasuries in a sense. So let's talk to them about exactly what you're going to do. And then the power of pre-approval. Now, I think there is a difference. You should let them know, if they haven't already spoken to a lender, this is your first opportunity to provide them with assistance. You should be using one of the many partners that you have that you work with, talking to your client. Why would you want to do that? Well, selfishly, who can you rely on? Only those people that you've worked with in the past and those people that are going to respond to you. So your own team should be developed in regards to lending, title, so on and so forth, inspections. You should have all of those people lined up. And those agents that are most seasoned also, they actually have a crew of people that are available to complete repairs, so on and so forth. So that's something that's very important. But let them know the different things that they may have to provide to the lender so they're not surprised about that. Then also, we want them to use your website. If they go to Zillow, they're already going to see the faces of other people. We don't want that happening. We don't want them to escape our domain. Use your website. It's going to keep them contained. It's also going to give you information in regards to what their search features are, or what their search characteristics consist of, what they like, what they don't like. So use that to your advantage and let them know this is the best possible way or venue for them to find the information that they want. Then also talk about the website that you're using, how it's going to benefit them. You need to give them some sense that they're getting a lot of value in regards to what you're providing. Home preferences, we've got a nice checklist. So have them complete this or talk to them so they can tell you what their preferences consist of. I continue to hear that many buyers are very disenchanted when agents are sending them properties for which they have no interest in. So let's get them to commit to something here, right? And if you send them something that meets their criteria, they say, "Why are you sending this to me?" And say, "Well, hey, that's great. Yeah, I'm happy to change it. I was following your criteria." Let's place the burden on them. But also, if I'm going to speak for myself, I don't remember everything somebody tells me. So let's get something in writing. That means speaking to them, writing down those notes. And I think if you're working with somebody and meeting with them personally, if they see you taking notes, they can see that you actually have sincere interest in regards to what their thoughts are. And then we're going to talk about making the offer. Well, I think there's a couple of things that we're going to point out here. Now, not everybody is going to read this, but I think this is something helpful for any buyer. I think we need to talk about what's selling in the neighborhood, what the list to sales price ratio is. Is there something that's listing for $1 million in that area, in the general vicinity, and selling for $1.2 million? It's telling you it's a highly competitive market. So tell them this is the information I'm going to be looking at. If the list to sales price ratio isn't 102%, it's 95%, well, it's suggesting to me that maybe the properties that they're looking at might be overpriced, and we have an opportunity to negotiate a much more favorable purchase price. But those are things that you should be talking to them about. And I think your CMA should also represent that. Let them know that properties in this area are selling at 102% of the asking price. I think what we're seeing now, there's a lot of those down arrows on the MLS indicating their prices are diminishing or decreasing. And it's simply because people have gotten too aggressive in regards to the asking price. So what is closed is critical in regards to your presentation. So I think that's something you need to tell them, because I think no one is going to know better than you what a valid price is for any property. Closing on your home. So what are we going to do? We're going to go through inspections, so on and so forth. So let's assume we're dissatisfied with the condition of the property. Well, if we haven't released our contingencies, and I think a lot of people don't understand all the contingencies, it could be a valid reason for somebody to back out of a transaction. That's not our goal here. We're here to close transactions. But I think from their perspective, they're always worried about losing their deposit. So protecting them, monitoring the contingencies. Archie, I see that smile on your face. You've had those discussions. So if there are defects, and then also covering that up, but the title search, tell them you're going to be looking at any defects associated in title. Most people look at that report and think, oh, this is irrelevant. That's not true. What if there are easements on their property, utility easements? I want to install a pool, but I can't do that because I can't place hard surface at a certain area of the property. So those are things that are critical. We're not here to raise suspicion or to cause a transaction to fail. But in most cases in this area, there probably aren't that many easements that are going to affect a transaction or prevent it from closing. Yes, Mary.
I found that I think with the recent uprise of commercials about title fraud, there are actually a lot more consumers with questions. So it would really be beneficial for agents to, at the very least, give some explanation of what they're being covered for. It's more than ever where I get calls from buyers wanting to just get an explanation.
So they're concerned that whomever the seller is doesn't have valid title to the property, and are they protected?
That along with the fact what their coverage is after the close. You know, to what effect are they covered if they were to become victims of fraud? You're seeing so much of that on the news, along with some of these companies like Title Lock that have spent millions of dollars.
I hear it all the time.
Yeah, so people now know what title insurance is.
So it's working.
I think so.
So other aspects that could cause coverage to no longer be effective would be if somebody transfers a portion of their interest, correct? So that's something else that you might tell a buyer that no one else is going to be aware of. Once they acquire their property, if there's a change in regards to how the property is vested, I would say excluding a transfer to a trust that's wholly owned by the original grantors to the trust, or an LLC in which all of the members are individuals, and in the same proportional interest of the original acquisition. So those could be exceptions. But if anybody else has an interest in the property, once they make a transfer, then title coverage is no longer valid. It's something they need to be aware of. And I can assure you, there's probably nobody else besides the people in this room are going to be telling their clients that.
Rich, a question that came up about a week ago was, if the seller's paying for my policy, why do I have to pay for another policy or a lender's policy? So maybe that's something.
I see. Okay, so the question is, why are buyers paying for the lender's policy? Well, because the lender requires it.
Right.
Nothing more than that. It's nothing that's being imposed, right?
They want to be covered.
They want to be covered, exactly, if there's
Might be
anything.
something to bring up, so later on they're not like, well, why?
So they
why are there
understand
two?
that,
Yeah.
yes. And it's interesting, the RPA, the default is that the buyer always pays for the coverage for the lender's policy. Now, I don't think that that's something that's mandated by statute, right? For some reason, the purchase contract just dictates that. Full service support. So what else you do, and don't ever take this for granted, but you should have all of these different resources: lending, repairs, title, escrow. That's something that's going to help them, because I can assure you that most people don't have those resources available to them. Especially when it comes to having work done on a property. I think it's very difficult, because if you're an agent that you continue to use certain contractors, they're going to be much more responsive to you than somebody that has a $500 job. If I'm a contractor, I'm not going to your house for $500. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense, does it, anymore? I can't afford the gasoline in their trucks anymore and the tools. So make that clear to them. And then there's a couple of things. Now, we have a number of definitions. And yes, there are definitions and acronyms that are, to us, it's everyday life. But to somebody who isn't doing this, now I would not suggest going through all of these, but for myself, I just highlighted a few of those. Amortization, assessed value. I think most people make the assumption that when a property is purchased, that the assessor is going to assess the value of the property based upon the sales price, and that's most likely going to be the case. But if you negotiate an exceptional purchase price, the assessed value could be higher than the purchase price, right? So they look at every single property that sells to make a determination what the taxes are going to be based upon. And then buy down. So people really understand what buy downs are. There's a permanent buy down. You can spend money to buy the interest rate down, or you can actually get a 2-1 buy down or 3-1 buy down. You're prepaying the interest. And that's something that you can actually negotiate in advance, maybe with the seller to pay for. A condominium. Well, what do people really know about a condo? Archie, what do you know about a condo? What do you own?
What do I know about condo?
If you own a condo, what is it you own actually?
I don't want to maintain the exterior.
Okay, you don't want to maintain the exterior, right? That's a valid response. What do you own? You own from the interior of the walls inside. That's it.
Yeah, and HOA, how much is the HOA? What are the HOA covers?
Yeah, but people don't really understand what they own. I think that's really the issue from my perspective. What do you own from the walls in? The studs you don't own. Very interesting, huh? And then you own an undivided interest in the common areas. That's it. If they ask that, I think a lot of people don't understand that. And if we hear the term townhomes, And it's not a legal word. It's not, there's no legal definition. It's a condominium. That's really what it comes down to. I think townhome just describes the structure maybe as 2 floors, nothing more than that. I think that's the,
Right.
yeah, the style. I think that's a good way of putting it. And then contingencies. Do people really understand what contingencies are? Well, that is a protection for them. So I think that's something to talk about. And then another word, deed. Anybody want to describe to me what a deed is? So there's a deed, a grant deed. There's a deed of trust. What's the difference?
Granted, title.
Very good. The grant deed is ownership. It's title. And what's a deed of trust?
Loan.
Yeah, it's the security interest that the lender records against the property. Yet the term deed is included in both. And I don't think most people really understand that. So let them know how intelligent you are. Here are the
How you have learned hard way.
but I think people confuse those terms constantly, as a matter of fact. Easements, right? The use of somebody else's land. We see easements on a prelim or title report from utility companies, most likely. Somebody, for some reason, has an easement recorded for access over the property. I guess it depends where it's going to be. That's something that could affect them. And encumbrance, it's anything that limits our use of the property. So these are things I think I would go over. And then another one is fee simple. If I have a fee simple interest in property, I can do anything I want. I can convey that through sale. I can convey that through death or through estate planning, right? Fixtures, well, what's a fixture? Something that's attached to the property and it goes with the property. Joint tenancy, it's an undivided interest. I don't think a lot of people understand that. If one of the joint tenants dies, the remaining or surviving joint tenant owns the remainder of the property. List to sale ratio, I think that's something you should be talking about to buyers. If a house is listed for $1 million, it sells for $1.2 million. Well, what is that percentage increase? What is it selling for? Yeah, it's right. It's 102% of it, right? At least 120% of it. As a matter of fact, in my example, 120%, that's the list to sales ratio. If I'm listing it for $1 million and selling it at 900, it's a 90% list to sales ratio. I think that's important when you're making offers on property to understand the comparables in the area. Loan to value ratio. Well, if I'm buying a home for $1 million, it's an $800,000 loan. What is my loan to value? It's 80%. I don't know if a lot of people understand that. Then a mortgage or a deed of trust. Well, mortgage, the term is in certain states have the term mortgage. They have mortgages. California has a deed of trust. It's the security interest that the lender records against the property. PITI, how many of you use that for that term? Do people always understand where principal, interest, taxes, and insurance are? Tenancy in common. And I'm just going through these. There's a lot of them, as a matter of fact. But it's a portion of the property that I own. So if I die, my 50% interest goes to my beneficiaries, not to the surviving joint tenant. So I think those are helpful things. Make them understand. If you have the time to sit down with a buyer and you're trying to earn their trust, the information that you have, that's what they're paying for. There's nothing else that's tangible here. And then go through this last slide. This is the second last slide. This is what I'm going to be doing. This is why you should be working with me. And then, of course, the most uncomfortable discussion of all, payment. I want you to sign a representation agreement. And there's different methods in which I can be compensated. So the seller offers compensation. So if a seller offers compensation, we don't see that very often, as a matter of fact. You can ask that the seller pay, or if the seller isn't offering any compensation when we're submitting an offer, we're going to ask that the seller pay. So what happens if the seller is not offering compensation? You're going to have to sign that agreement with me and you're going to have to pay, but we're going to negotiate with the seller to pay my compensation. And then if you're the listing agent, when you receive offers, and I've seen this quite often, as a matter of fact, sellers are saying, well, I don't want to pay the agent's commission. Increase the price. Counter them. It's that simple. When you're the listing agent, say, hey, let's just increase the price by the amount of commission that the buyer's asking you to pay. Why not? Exactly. And the seller's gonna say, oh, your sales point should be, you're gonna net the same amount of money. And you want to sell the house, don't you? Because the buyer only has so much cash. They gave us their evidence of funds. They don't have sufficient money possibly to pay the agent's commissions. And then, of course, the worst possible case is the seller just refuses to do anything and isn't paying anything. But it seems to me, you know, with this article I was just briefly sharing with you, that most sellers are agreeing to pay some, if not all, of the buyer's agent's commissions. I don't think that it's anything unusual, as a matter of fact. So that's that part of today's discussion. Now I just want to go through a few other things with you. This is to give clarity in regards to what's taking place with the settlement. So everybody has a better understanding about how we can proceed as we go along here. So if somebody submits an offer and they submit the on section 3G3 of the RPA, right, which refers to the seller payment to buyer's broker for commission, and are asking the seller to pay the buyer's agent's commission. If the seller doesn't agree, what can you do? You can increase the purchase price, or you can counter the SPBB, right? So the seller payment to buyer's broker requested by the buyer is at 3%, but the seller's only willing to pay 2%. You can counter that. So you have two choices. You can actually say, the seller can say, I'm going to increase the price and I'll pay the commission that's on the seller payment to buyer's broker, or I can counter that. And you should just reference section 3G3 of the RPA, specifically form SPBB, and say seller agrees to pay 2% of the buyer's agent's commission. So it's very simple in that regard. Now, do you have any obligation when you're submitting an offer to submit the buyer representation agreement with the offer? No, seller cannot demand that. The seller can request evidence of that after an accepted offer exists. So you don't have to do that. As a matter of fact, it's probably not beneficial for a seller to make that demand that I see the buyer representation broker compensation agreement at the time offers are being submitted. Submit those offers. Give me the opportunity to evaluate those offers. Don't make a demand on the buyer or the buyer's agent to submit their contractual obligation with the buyer at that point in time. I think it's not beneficial to the seller, as a matter of fact. And then also, if the buyer submits the form SPBB, which is seller payment to buyer's broker, and whether or not the seller agrees to pay that compensation that's on that form, must the seller sign that form? And the answer is yes. Even if they're going to counter it, because if we don't sign the seller payment to buyer broker form and we return the purchase contract, we do not have an executed agreement. We have nothing. So if the seller payment to buyer's broker form is submitted with the RPA, and you're going to see that probably in every single case, the seller must sign that and return it. They can counter it, but if you don't do that, once again, there is no executed agreement. So I think that's very, very important when you're managing your transactions. Sellers may say, I don't want to sign this because I'm not agreeing to that. Well, do you want to enter or have a fully executed contract? Yes or no? So we'll just counter the commissions that are specified on the SPBB.
Rich, so what you're saying is if the seller decides not to pay the commission, they would have to counter that in the state that in the counter offer, seller does not agree to pay any commission, but also send that form signed.
Correct.
SPBB signed.
Correct. Correct.
Well, make sure.
That's okay.
Check the 3G3.
Yeah.
And then attach SPBB. And then that can sign both.
Yes.
And if they don't want to pay, we still have to do it. The same you want to pay.
Correct. Correct.
But don't forget to counter it out.
Don't forget to counter it out. So all you have to do is counter.
Yeah.
Actually, Sarah just had, I was working with Sarah in a transaction in which she had an offer. And then she countered the compensation on the SPBB requested by the buyer to pay the buyer's agents. And then Today, they came back and that all they did was submit the buyer representation broker compensation agreement. In their counter, they never specified the commission. It's meaningless. Just because they show us what the buyer's obligation is, doesn't mean the seller has any obligation to pay more than what they specified in their counter. Does that make sense? So the buyer submitted an offer and
As listing agent.
they submitted an offer to serve as a listing agent. They wanted 3%, for example.
Mhm.
And then we countered them at 2%.
Okay,
And then they came back with a counter offer, but they didn't say that the seller is to pay 2.5% of the buyer's agent's commission. They just submitted Form BRBC. Great, we know how much the buyer has to pay. That's wonderful. Yeah, they came back, well, we agreed to 2%. They submitted a BRBC at 2.5%, but they never counted it in the purchase contract. So it's meaningless. That's great. We know what the buyer's obligation is, nothing more than that.
Are they saying that they're asking for 2.5%? Or did they
That's a
just-
presumption. So when Sarah and I talked, we both agreed that most likely she should verbally tell the buyer's agent that, look,
to be fair.
nothing has changed here. We're only paying 2%. You didn't counter us asking us to pay 2.5%. So it's no different than countering a purchase price. You just have to be very cognizant of that.
That's one of the terms, basically. Huh?
Yes, it is. It's one of the terms, as a matter of fact. And then here's another good question. So can the buyer's agent write a provision into their buyer representation agreement in which they will agree to reduce the charge commission to whatever amount the seller agrees to pay? So I've taken a buyer representation agreement with my buyer. And then in the purchase contract, we've said that, who knows, maybe the buyer representation agreement reflects that I'll accept whatever the seller is willing to pay. Well, that is not enforceable. And you're in violation of the settlement. It has to be a definitive amount negotiated between the buyer and the buyer's agent. But what's odd to me, this is a question that Gina brought up previously, and that Carr Legal told me that this is acceptable. Let's say I'm representing the buyer and I have a BRBC at 3%. And everybody agrees to it. The seller agrees to pay the 3%. Then I credit my buyer $10,000 out of that. They're telling me that that's acceptable. So it just cannot be a moving target on the buyer representation agreement or what the seller is willing to pay. You have to ask for a definitive amount. And then the commission agreement. So I've seen in offers now, when buyers are submitting offers, they're also submitting the buyer representation broker compensation agreement. Is that a requirement? No, it's not. Don't have to do that. The seller can request evidence of what the commission is that the buyer's obligated to pay the buyer's broker after acceptance, but nothing more than that. And then we talked about the SPBB if it's not signed by all parties. So let's assume we don't, the buyer submits a seller payment to buyer broker form and it's not signed by the seller. Well, and we return the contract signed. We don't have an executed contract. Options are you can have an addendum signed, in which everybody agrees to whatever the commission is or zero commission. Or theoretically, the seller can sign that SPBB and then the buyer can once again sign and date the form they previously signed. So that would be a way to obtain a fully executed contract.
Rich, what would happen if your offer got accepted and then they asked for the BRBC and the buyer's agent just wrote one up that same day, had them sign it, and they just didn't think about it, signed it that same day? Is it still valid?
Yeah, because it's post dated.
Yeah, because it's dated after the fact. Yeah.
I would say no. They're not entitled to anything. So yeah, good question.
Make sure they document.
Yeah, you make sure it's stated before, right?
Yeah, of course. But I'm sure that that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, they send it up for digital signatures and it's got today's date. and
It's got today's day, right? Yeah. Hey, too bad you didn't have an actual agreement. As a matter of fact, you probably showed the property. You're in violation. You've provided complete documentation. You violated the settlement. And right now, what's interesting, the settlement is not California law yet. It's going to be January 1st because our governor has signed that into law. It's effective January 1st. But theoretically, if we're not following the terms of the settlement, we could be sued by somebody individually because we have violated the terms of the settlement. Right now, we're all included as being released from the litigation. But if we violate the terms of the settlement, guess who could be sued for violating that?
Jeff has a question. Are people seeing listing agents making people come into their open houses, sign an OHNA or any other type of BREs, I guess for a
Representation agreement?
or just letting them come in and engage them in conversation about the property?
I would say we're seeing everything. So people, listing agents are mandating that buyers sign the OHNA. Or if they don't have, if they won't sign that, they may not let them into the property. Or other listing agents are simply letting buyers into the property. Or other agents are saying, you have to sign with me if you want to see it. So,
What is required?
what is required as a listing agent? Well, you're just taking risk if you allow someone to enter the property without signing the open house advisory form, the OHNA. Because that states specifically you're not representing them. Otherwise, any information you give them, it could be an implied agency relationship. And if you don't have a representation agreement signed, you theoretically, based upon everything I've read, could be held to the same standard as any other agent representing a buyer or seller. And it would be entitled gratuitous, meaning you're going to do all that work for free. I gave you information. I don't have a representation agreement signed. The buyer believes that you are my agent and I'm going to sue you now because you're acting as my agent. It doesn't matter whether you're being paid or not.
That's just silly.
It is silly, but all litigation, not all, but is just that. It's based upon conjecture and people think they're entitled. And if they see something for free, so that's the worst possible case. Somebody believes that Archana was acting as my representative. She was telling me about the purchase price. Let's use an example. So let's assume a buyer walks into an open house and is non-represented. So there's a couple things that you're entitled to do, strangely enough. If you are a listing agent, you're entitled under the car copyright guidelines to provide a purchase contract to that buyer who is not represented. You can put in the name of the buyer. You can put in possibly the name of the seller and the property address, and you can give them that purchase contract and say, fill it out. And you can submit your own offer. You're unrepresented. If you go more than that, you start talking to them about the purchase price or other aspects of the transaction. What Carr is saying, you are now creating an agency relationship. You don't have a representation agreement signed. It's now gratuitous, meaning you've got all the same obligations and liability as any other agent, because you created an agency relationship.
What if you haven't signed a non-agency?
Well, that would be the best thing to do.
Can
You
you
would have
still give the information to them after they sign?
No, I wouldn't give them any information.
It's so awkward.
It is awkward. Yeah.
That's why the open houses are dead right now. Everybody's so ready.
Yeah, they don't know what to do.
I can see this creating issues with reviews for agents.
Yeah,
The agent was so rude to me at the open house, they wouldn't answer any of my questions. Don't work with this person. Like this.
oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got that from the phone call I've been.
Yeah, you're already hearing it. Yeah. It's only been about a month or so,
Yeah,
since a month and a half since the settlement. So that's the problem.
so basically you tell them, hey, first sign the agreement, then we talk.
Yeah, I would think,
So
just
really,
at least
that's my
sign the-
salesperson then.
yeah,
Yeah,
sign the PSRA, the limited agreement just for that property, if you're gonna help them in that regard. So that's, unfortunately, you can imagine, at least in my opinion, there are going to be lawsuits ensuing, just because there's going to be attorneys out there who are advertising this stuff. Have you spoken to an agent? Did you have an agreement signed? Did they guide you or counsel you?
What would be an ideal time frame for the PSRA? To put like
Maybe.
beginning date and ending date, like a month or just for that day or?
You could, with any of these representation agreements, you could say they can cancel in a day. If they're that concerned about it.
Oh, okay.
You could do that. There's nothing that stops you
And
from
they
doing
can
it.
bring their agent next day and submit an offer. Is that what happened?
Well, I would, I think he's saying if, you're talking to somebody, you yourself, and you're giving them information.
No, I'm talking about the timeframe. So your representation for them for that property begins on this day and ends on this day, right? So
Mhm.
there's a time frame. So even if you just set it for that one day because you showed them the property, they can't submit an offer through somebody else.
You
Right?
make sure that you invoke the protection clause. If you make an offer through somebody else within the next 90 days or so, then I'm entitled to the compensation and I'll represent you.
But are you not then just delaying the sale for the other listing, like?
I don't think
for
anybody
your-
cares
No,
about,
there's conflict, there's no conflict.
I don't think that, the problem is, I don't think anyone cares about the downfall of benefits to a seller or to a buyer.
That's so sad.
It's terrible.
Where is their consumer?
I don't see any benefit
their
to the
housing?
consumer with this
Yeah.
whole thing. And then another thing about seller concessions, remember, lenders will limit concessions based upon the loan to value. But if you break out they will not consider commissions as a seller concession if it's broken out separately. Sometimes you can actually, I think it's 3G1 of the purchase contract, say, I want the seller to pay $25,000 in concessions.
Mhm.
So that's going to be capped based upon the loan to value. And maybe the buyer's going to use that $25,000 concession to pay their agent's commissions. But if you break out concessions in 3G1 separately from the commissions in 3G3, anything in section 3G3 is not going to be looked at as a concession by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. So that's the advantage of breaking it out separately. The credits going back to a buyer will not include the commissions that the seller is paying on behalf of the buyer to the buyer's agent.
So 3G.
3G3, that's the line item associated with the seller payment to buyer broker commission. 3G1 is just a simple concession on, I want the seller to credit me $20,000.
3G3 will not be included as part of loan to value ratio.
It will not be included it will not be included in regards to how lender is capping the amount of concessions that a seller can pay.
Hey, Richard, I had a question for you. Hello, can you hear me?
That one. And then we're kind of jumping around here, but we're getting close to the end. That's the good news. Thank you, Archie. Glad you're happy now. Broker compensation for arranging leases or rentals. So the settlement does not apply to leasing activity, meaning you don't have to have a representation agreement. And I told you previously there was the exact opposite. You don't have to have a representation agreement signed by a prospective tenant. So that's not a requirement.
One thing, right?
But of course, when I spoke to Carr, they said, if you want to avoid any type of litigation, you should be having a representation agreement signed by your prospective tenant. And most likely what's going to happen, what I foresee is that our MLS or Carr or NAR is probably going to come out and say at some point in time that you're going to have to follow the same guidelines as you would for a purchase, meaning having a representation agreement. And then not only that, if you don't have a representation agreement, how do you know you're going to be paid? So there aren't too many options when representing a tenant. There is no offer form, unfortunately, but there is the so-called tenant representation broker compensation agreement. The analogy is the buyer representation broker compensation agreement. If you're working with a tenant, have them sign the TRBC, and they're obligated to pay you commission. They're entitled to a credit for anything that anyone else pays in terms of the commission for the agent representing the tenant. So that is an option I would suggest. And then also there's the lease commission agreement, LCA. What I would suggest doing, you should, before submitting an offer, if there is no such offer on a lease, send the lease commission agreement to the listing agent on a rental, have the seller sign it. Let me just pull it up. I've got it here.
Rich, I have a question on the tenant representation, the commission agreement.
Uh-huh.
It has section, lines for for landlord to sign and one for tenants to sign.
For the
It-
TRBC?
Yes, but is the signer only the person that you're making the agreement with, or do all parties have to sign? Because the agreement is either between the landlord and you as the agent, and then they sign at the bottom, or between the tenant and you as the agent.
Well, for the TRBC, it's simply between the tenant and the tenant's agent.
So, the one I'm talking about is the commission agreement.
The lease commission agreement,
Yes.
LCA.
Yes.
Okay. So if we were to go in sequential order, ideally, we would have the TRBC signed. This is just the agreement between the tenant and us as the tenant's representative. And this is obligating the tenant to pay a certain amount of commission. And then before we sign a lease agreement on any prospective rental property, we would submit the lease rental commission agreement, which is shown on your screen, and ask the landlord to sign this. And this is going to be something that's agreed to between the housing provider, which is the property owner, and the tenant, and the agent representing the tenant.
So my question is, if you scroll up a little bit, it says either the housing provider or the tenant agrees to pay. So if it's an agreement between you and the housing provider, is the housing provider's signature required only because it's between you and the housing provider? And
No,
the same-
you need both signatures,
Okay.
the tenant and the housing provider.
the tenant signature is just that they're acknowledging that you're getting paid, or
Well, I would say the reason there's two, and I don't know if you can check both boxes or not, but realistically, if we want the housing provider to pay the tenant's agent's commission,
Yeah.
you would check the box for housing provider. And if the TRBC shows 3%, we would insert 3%. You would say housing provider agrees to pay to broker compensation equal to 3%.
so why is the tenant box there? Tenant agrees.
As
to
I
pay.
said, I don't know because I haven't done it myself to see if maybe there could be a split.
Okay. Because it would be redundant, right? If
It doesn't
this
make
form-
sense to have the box where tenant agrees
Yeah.
to pay because the tenant's already paying whatever the difference is,
Right.
if there is any difference.
Okay,
So remember, ideally, if you're working with the tenant, have the tenant representation broker compensation agreement signed before you show them property. It is not mandatory, but it is considered to be a best practice to do that. And if they go to any open house or talk to the listing agent, you might be out of a transaction, you won't be compensated. But once you have the TRBC signed, theoretically, when a tenant finds a property they wish to occupy, send the lease rental commission agreement in advance to the listing agent, asking that the landlord pay the commission.
So in real time scenario, I did couple of leases. I get calls, most of my leases get leased to Zillow. Very few, I would say 30% get leased to agents.
Mhm.
So I have to get this signed. So my listing, I have to sign at certain percent with us.
You would do that right on your listing agreement with the
And then
landlord.
I have to do this with each person that's coming to the door through Zillow.
Well, do you want, let me ask you this, on the lease listing agreement, are you asking the landlord to pay 3%? That's 5%. Okay, well, that's fine. Good for you. Do you want the tenant to also pay something?
That's a change in mindset. I have to now say that to the tenant. I get a call from Zillow, hey, by the way, I have to charge you this much. And
You can, you don't have to. That's at your discretion.
And what happens if I have a listing of 5?
So if you have a listing at 5, And then you want the tenant to pay, we'll just simplistic say 1%. So you
Yeah.
get to collect 6%.
Yeah.
So you can do one of two things. You can submit this lease rental commission agreement to the landlord saying, my tenant wants you to pay 1% of the commission. I'm already getting 5% from you, Mr. Landlord, but the tenant wants me to pay the 1% they owe me. The landlord could just simply say no. I think it's the presentation with the rental property owner. That's, yeah, so you can do that,
What if I
absolutely.
have this 5%, which is 60% of the case, 70%? I get the application through agent who's asking me, which is what is happening last few
Mhm.
weeks, is, hey, is your owner paying, is your seller paying? You know, that's the first call I get.
Yeah.
Even before showing. In that case, can I still split it? Like.
You
I have to
can.
change the
You can
thing?
split that 5% if you want. Unfortunately, CAR has not provided us, they've removed any form in regards to agent sharing commissions. So you can do that. There's no question you can do that. It's actually even mentioned in the residential lease or month-to-month agreement. So it's perfectly legal to do that. It's just there's no convenient facility provided us unless we draft our own documents in terms of commission sharing. So a way to get around that would be to say to your landlord, I'm going to reduce my commission to 3%, and then you're going to pay the buyer's agent commission of 3%. So that's probably the easiest way to do it.
So just do an MP, like modification.
Yeah, modification of terms in your lease listing agreement. That seems to be the most simplistic way right now of doing it.
Okay.
Since there's nothing assisting us in that regard.
Carmenza has a similar question. She said, a listing agent said to me yesterday, there's a compensation, but I can't write or say how much it will be because I'll get sued. But there is a buyer agent compensation. Let's see, how can you let the other party know how to proceed?
So there's another aspect of misinformation. That agent is absolutely incorrect because,
Yeah.
first of all, the settlement doesn't even apply. It's just for a lease listing.
Yes.
Okay, the settlement does not apply to lease listings. It just CRMLS or CAR-NAR decided to remove all the commission fields from everything on the MLS. They could have allowed it to remain with lease listings, but they chose just to remove everything. So that's incorrect. You can share that information, whether it's a purchase or a lease listing. You as a listing agent can share the amount of compensation that you're offering.
But if they don't want to share that information with you, she's asking, how do you proceed?
Just submit your offer, use the LCA, say, this is what I want to be paid. And then ideally the rental property owner signs that. So that would be the best approach. I would think no matter what, that's what you want. But you should have ideally TRBC signed. If you don't, you're still not in violation. That's okay. It's perfectly acceptable. But if you don't have the tenant representation broker compensation agreement signed with somebody that you theoretically are representing on a lease, the listing agent can say, oh, you can just come directly to me.
And it's so easy for them just to go with somebody else.
Yeah, it is. It's really easy. There's nothing that's stopping the listing agent from just saying, oh, just forget Carmenza, just come directly to me. That's the problem here. That's the problem with having a buyer going out to any type of properties. As a procuring cause now, it's even less favorable for a buyer's agent when a buyer goes to an
So
open
what
house.
happens right now, I don't see the agents, yeah, I think 70% of agents are not making everybody sign the open house or
Yeah.
the advisory. And I have a buyer who has signed ERBC.
Mhm.
He's just wakes up on Sunday morning and decides to visit open house without informing me. He goes, visits open house, comes home and then calls me, hey, I saw this house, I want to write an offer on it. How is that perceived in the law?
You've got the BRBC signed, that buyer's obligated to pay you no matter what. Even if they've signed another representation agreement, you're entitled to compensation.
I can enforce that.
Absolutely. We will enforce that.
Tell them to make sure not to sign anything when you go to the open houses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it like whoever signs first as goes with the dates.
Oh, no, they can sign multiple representation agreements to be obligated to pay everybody. That's what it comes down to. Yeah.
There are things like that.
Yeah.
I can see. Overseas people.
Put a lien on their new house, huh?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
They for more commission than down payment, I guess.
So the advice is do not sign with anybody.
Do not sign, yeah, you sign with me, don't sign with anybody else, yeah, that is the advice, yeah.
Or you have to pay.
Or you're gonna have to pay, right?
Carmen's is asking, what about if you represent yourself?
Okay,
Why would you? pay
Carmenza,
yourself?
what's your question?
Yeah.
If you represent yourself as a tenant,
oh, and there's no commission being offered, you have to speak with Richard. So I can tell you how much you owe me. That's what you must do. I think that answered that question. And then, let's see. I wanted to go over this also, the residential security deposits, as we're talking about leases. Remember, as of July 1st, a rental property owner who owns more than 2 separate alienable units of no more than 4 individual units is limited to a 1-month security deposit. So if I own 3 rental units, and it doesn't matter where they are in the USA, I cannot charge a tenant more than 1 month security deposit. So somebody says, oh, last month's rent, well, that's a security deposit. Oh, I want a pet deposit. That's a security deposit. So it all adds up. If my rental rate is $3,000 a month and I own 3 rental properties, you can't charge more than $3,000. I don't care how many pets, kids, or anything else you have, right? But if I own 2 duplexes, I can charge you 2 months security deposit. So people charge key deposits, pet deposits. Once again, it's capped at 2 times the rental rate for those people that meet the exemption. And how do we really know that somebody meets the exemption? Well, the only people that are entitled to the exemption are individuals, an LLC in which none of the members are corporately owned. It could be a family trust, for example, right? Or just relatives associated with the individuals that own it, nothing more than that. So it's limited.
so is the total deposit can't exceed the 1 month or 2 months. So even if they add a pet deposit or a key deposit, it cannot exceed that amount. So if it's like, in your example, $3,000 for that month, they can't say 3,000 plus a $150 key deposit, plus a $500 pet deposit, plus anything else.
That's
correct?
correct.
That is for.
What about the
non-exempt?
And,
I'm sorry, what?
and you're better not off not putting key or pet if you're gonna max it out, because if there's damages and it's not caused by the pet, or if they give the key back, then you do have to give them all that money back. So you're better off having a blanket
Yeah,
I
just
see that in the MLS law
deposit.
where they're asking
So-
for,
maxed out.
they're breaking it down.
If someone owns only one property,
Huh?
they can charge 2 months.
2 months.
They can do that.
Right.
And then how do you know?
That's
Right?
right.
Well, there's a form, security deposit disclosure and addendum. This is the only way I would know whether or not somebody is entitled to the exemption or not, based upon their statement in writing, I am or am not entitled to the exemption. This explains it. And you had a question?
Yeah, so for no policy, what about there's a furniture in the rental property? Can we ask like more, like before?
No,
Or even they have furniture.
it doesn't matter if it's furnished or not, so,
What's it before a policy that can ask for if it's furnished, can ask more deposit?
correct.
Oh, well, that's pretty bad.
It's really bad.
They have furniture, that'd be bad.
Yes.
I'm gonna ask more
Yeah.
about that.
Only 1 month's rent. And then if it's a service member, doesn't matter if you own only 1 property, you can only charge them 1 month security deposit also.
Make a chart, please.
Make a chart.
Carlos, can you make a
Yeah,
chart?
I will,
and
I
show
will.
me like-
Okay. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you have furniture, keys, pets, 1 month. If you're not exempt, no more than 2 months. So, and remember, last month's rent. That's a security deposit.
Maybe time to change one of the days. I put 2 months deposit plus tax.
After July 1st? You did that?
They have not signed it.
Oh, good. Modify it.
Yeah, that's what I'm here.
Because we're probably telling our property owners, oh, you can charge 2 months security deposit, 3 months, and then they're in violation of the law.
No, I normally I did.
Okay, good.
I didn't.
Good answer.
Just these, some people don't have credit.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what their credit is. I think that's even more of a reason to be stringent in regards to how you're screening tenants.
Foreign national.
Well, foreign nationals, if they don't have a credit score, you can adopt minimums credit score standards. That's the way to address individuals maybe that don't have a taxpayer ID, thus don't have a credit score. As long as you apply it equally, does that make sense? You've got this puzzled look on your face, or you don't. Can you go ahead? Just ask me.
No, like. When you say apply universally.
Consistent. Apply your standards, your criteria consistently.
So you.
To the interested tenants, right, to the interested applicants, I have to
Yes.
apply that.
Yes. Yeah. Because I think that's a dilemma. You can't deny when we're granting housing as a rental property owner, we're granting credit. You can't deny somebody credit simply because they're here illegally. Oh, they're here legally?
Wait, those we are in Irvine.
Uh-huh. So that's why if you adopt consistent standards and
Yeah,
apply
we
that.
get a lot of Korean families that come here for work or
Uh-huh.
education. I've done few of those.
Oh, I believe it.
Anyway,
As long as they're consistent standards, whatever those may be, that's what you tell the property owner. Okay, any other questions before we conclude today's discussion? I guess not. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Sorry about the late notice about the change in venue and the discussion today. But, and then we have movie tickets, right, John?
Yes,
Is everybody turned their cards in? I don't think we've collected business cards yet, have we?
it looks like there's no winners.
A lot of winners percentage wise. Are you asking him to pick your card, Sonny?
Yeah, because my card, remember the size is different. It's bigger.
Is that it?
Randy, did you put your card in? You didn't bring a card.
You want one? You want one?
For
Yeah,
me,
name.
yeah.
What's the name?
Good, how are you today? Thanks for coming.
Take mine.
What's the name?
There's more cards than
Did you put one in for Randy? Miss Sue, did you put one in for Randy?
For what?
Did you put one in for Randy?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Is that for Randy?
No, okay.
So someone put one in for you, Randy.
Okay, perfect, there you go.
All right, I'll go ahead and draw a couple. Here we go. And if you don't win, sorry.
Bye, everybody.